I'm Sharon Mitchell, 37 years old. 3 years ago, for the sake of my family, I gave up everything. I quit my job as a retail store manager to devote myself fully to caring for my mother, who suffers from chronic diabetes. I've been paying her medical bills and covering our family's mortgage, yet I've never asked for a single word of gratitude. When I was 15, she promised to give me her heirloom necklace, a platinum necklace adorned with a pearl pendant, a symbol of her love for me. I've always cherished that promise. But at that family dinner in Atlanta, everything changed. My father raised his glass and proclaimed loudly, "To our real daughter, the one who's always been by our side." Everyone cheered in agreement. Then, my mother handed that very necklace to my younger sister. It was my necklace. My mother said my younger sister was far more deserving of it. I froze in place, clutching the napkin tightly, but no one noticed anything unusual about me. I didn't cry, nor did I shout or make a scene. Instead, I simply got up, took the children by the hand, gave my husband a nod, and walked straight out the door. A week later, the bank called them, and panic began to spread. If you were in my shoes, if your closest family members turned their backs on you, what would you do? Feel free to leave a comment and share your thoughts. That Sunday, we were having dinner at my parents' home in Atlanta, the atmosphere warm and cozy, yet somehow unbearably heavy for me. My husband, William, sat beside me, chatting with my father about soccer, while the kids giggled happily over their plates. I forced a smile, trying to blend in, but inside, I was weighed down by 3 years of sacrifices, quitting my job to care for my mother, paying her medical bills, and covering our mortgage. I never asked for any praise. I just assumed they'd see all that I'd done. Suddenly, my father stood up, raised his glass, and proudly toasted the daughter who's truly been there for us, taking care of everything. But when he looked over, it was my younger sister, Deborah, he was addressing, and everyone burst into applause. Next, my mother pulled out the platinum pearl necklace she'd promised me when I was 15 and handed it straight to Deborah, saying that Deborah was far more deserving of it. I clenched my fork tightly, my cheeks burning with embarrassment. I felt as if I'd turned invisible, but I bit back any urge to lash out. I pushed my chair away from the table, spoke in a low, firm voice. "We're leaving now." William immediately stood up, took hold of the child who'd been grumbling about not getting dessert, and followed me out the door. The door clicked shut behind us, and the cool night breeze slapped against my face like a sharp slap. I didn't look back. In the car, the children had buckled their seat belts, and William sat silently beside me. I kept replaying my mother's words over and over. Deborah is far more deserving of this. I'd given so much for them, countless late-night hospital visits over the past 3 years, paying every possible bill, even preventing their house from being foreclosed. I thought about that promise I'd made at 15, about how my mother had once told me I was her emotional rock. That necklace wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was her promise, her love. Yet she gave it to someone else. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my knuckles turning white from the sheer force of my grip. For years, I'd been their safe harbor, transferring money for their mortgage, paying for my mother's insulin prescriptions, never asking for a single penny in return. I did it because I believed in family, in loyalty. But loyalty is a two-way street, and right then, their actions made it crystal clear where I stood in this household. In that very moment, something inside me shattered completely. I would no longer beg for their respect, nor would I continue to exhaust myself for those who couldn't even see me. By the time we pulled into our driveway, I'd made up my mind. I would no longer carry their burdens on my shoulders. The next morning, I logged into the bank app and canceled the automatic transfers to my parents' account. No more mortgage payments, no more bills to cover. I didn't make a phone call to explain, nor did I send a message to let them know. I just clicked cancel and closed my laptop. My hands were trembling, not out of fear, but because I'd suddenly seen things clearly. I'd given them everything, my time, my money, my whole heart, but they'd given the necklace that should have been mine to my younger sister. If they really think Deborah is the real daughter, then it's about time she took care of them herself. For the first time in years, I didn't rush over to fix their problems for them. For the first time, I wasn't their emotional rock. Maybe this is actually for the best. A week later, my father called in a panic because he'd fallen behind on his mortgage payments, his tone dripping with accusation. The bank says the mortgage hasn't been paid. It's always been your responsibility to handle this. What have you been doing? I took a deep breath and calmly replied, I'm not paying anymore. You said Deborah's taking care of you. Let her deal with it. The line went silent on the other end, followed by my father's furious protest. I hung up the phone immediately, my heart filled with stifled anger. I couldn't help but think back to that Sunday evening dinner, the betrayal. My father had praised Deborah as the real daughter, and my mother had handed over the necklace that should have been mine straight into her hands. For 3 years, I'd been running around tirelessly, taking care of them and covering their bills, but all they ever saw was Deborah, who came by only once a month to bring them coffee. This utter disregard cut deep, yet I'd made up my mind. I would no longer let myself be consumed. Helping them had been a choice I'd made in the past. Now, I was determined to stop being their aim. 2 days later, my mother called, her tone sharp and utterly devoid of the gentle kindness she usually displayed when asking me for favors. Sharon, she snapped, how could you let something like this happen? The bank is threatening to foreclose on the house. You know I'm sick. You know we can't do without you. I clenched my teeth, forcing myself to suppress the urge to shout. She hadn't mentioned that dinner at all, nor the necklace, nor any of the sacrifices I'd made for them over the years. Mom, I said, I've already done more than enough. Deborah is your real daughter. Go find her. She gasped sharply, then fell silent. I hung up the phone, my heart racing wildly. I felt as if I'd torn off a layer of bandage. Though the pain was excruciating, I didn't feel the slightest bit of regret. They'd made their choice. Now it was my turn to make mine. That same week, my cousin Douglas sent me a text saying he'd seen a notice from the bank about our parents' mortgage default. The situation was critical. I asked him for details and confirmed that since I'd stopped sending money, the mortgage payments had ceased entirely, and the bank had already begun proceedings for foreclosure. My parents were thrown into panic. I felt absolutely no sympathy for them, not after how long they'd ignored me. Soon after, I learned that Deborah had moved in with her parents. My aunt even called William to complain, saying Deborah had claimed to be fully in charge and promised to handle all their problems. This left me deeply suspicious. Deborah had never paid a single bill for her parents, yet suddenly she was acting like some kind of hero. I remembered how smug she'd looked when she'd snatched the necklace during dinner, and I was convinced there was more to this than met the eye. I resolved to dig deeper. Leveraging my previous access to helping my parents manage their finances, I contacted the bank and confirmed that their mortgage payments were 2 months overdue, with late fees accumulating steadily. At the same time, I discovered that my mother's credit card had recently made several unexplained charges, but the bank employee was reluctant to reveal any details. This only strengthened my suspicions. Deborah had taken control of their accounts just 2 weeks after moving in, and her claim to take care of everything probably hid something shady. I dug out years' worth of bank statements and payment confirmations my parents had kept, and sure enough, I found numerous small, unusual withdrawals and transfers. Combining Deborah's naturally gifted gift for sweet talk with her cunning nature, I've begun to suspect that she might be misappropriating our parents' money. Although there's no concrete evidence yet, I'm determined not to let this slide. I immediately reached out to a lawyer to seek advice on formally requesting an audit of our parents' bank accounts, determined to uncover the truth about her true character. 3 weeks after that dinner, my mother left me a voice message. Her tone was far softer than usual. Sharon, honey. Her voice almost pleading. I miss the kids so much. Can we talk? We didn't mean to upset you. I sat on the sofa, replaying the message twice. My phone felt heavy in my hand. Her words sounded so warm and familiar, just like the mom who used to braid my hair when I was a child. But I'm no longer a child. I won't fall for her sweet talk anymore. She still hasn't mentioned that dinner, nor the necklace, and she hasn't brought up all the years I've devoted to them. In fact, she hasn't even apologized for what happened at dinner. I need some space, Mom. Please respect my decision, I replied in a text message. My finger hovered over the send button, and after a brief hesitation, I finally pressed it. A flicker of guilt crossed my mind, but it quickly faded away. They'd once made me feel utterly worthless, and now they were trying to let their children fill the void they'd left behind. No way was I going to let that happen. A few days later, the estate planner called to inform me that my parents were revising their financial arrangements and planning to remove me from the list of joint account signers and power of attorney designees. Those accounts were tied to the house I'd worked years to keep by paying off the mortgage. The power of attorney had been my lifeline, enabling me to handle medical matters for my seriously ill mother. I pressed the new trustee for details, and sure enough, the answer was Deborah, the very same woman who'd never paid a single bill and had used her smooth talk to steal my necklace. After hanging up, my thoughts raced chaotically. Not only had they betrayed me, but they were also determined to erase me completely from the family and hand everything over to her. Looking at the bank records showing the expenses I've been footing for them over the years, a cold resolve surged through me. I'd never let this happen. That very evening, my friend Evelyn sent me an email attaching copies of my mother's credit card statements, provided by our friend at the bank, that revealed a series of recent purchases made by someone other than my mother. $800 worth of clothing from Target, a $1,200 handbag from Nordstrom, and $500 for a trip to Orlando. Just 2 weeks after Deborah moved in, she'd already taken full control of the account. Clearly, she was squandering her parents' money. I immediately forwarded the documents to my lawyer, who confirmed that the situation was serious. Though more evidence would be needed, he said we could definitely launch a case. My anger boiled over, and a deep sense of mission welled up inside me. Deborah thought she could manipulate everything, but I'd never let her get away with it. Over the next few days, I reached out to everyone who'd been privy to my parents' financial affairs over the years, the cousin who helped them file their taxes, and the neighbor who'd inadvertently overheard Deborah bragging about her new life. Every conversation brought the pieces of the truth a little closer together. Deborah had been hinting to others that she was taking care of the family, yet behind their backs, she was using their money to buy clothes and plane tickets. I felt a wave of nausea, not just for myself, but for my parents as well. They'd chosen her, trusted her, and yet she was draining their life savings. But I'm no longer their savior, nor will I ever again beg for their respect. This isn't about saving them, it's about holding Deborah accountable for what she's done. By the weekend, I'd gathered enough clues to confirm that my suspicions were right. The email from Evelyn was just the beginning. I told my lawyer that we could now formally request an audit of our mother's bank accounts. Deborah has crossed the line, and I'm ready to fight back. Not for that necklace, not for their approval, but for the truth. 1 month later, I received a lawyer's letter from an Atlanta downtown law firm, commissioned by Deborah. As I tore open the envelope, my hands were steady, yet my heart was racing. She'd actually sued me, accusing me of coercing my seriously ill mother into transferring the property and stealing her assets. This was utterly absurd. For years, I'd been faithfully making mortgage payments and preventing the house from being foreclosed upon, yet she was now calling me a villain. Clutching the letter, my anger boiling over, I immediately called my friend Evelyn. Evelyn asked me to check my email and then forwarded a text message she'd received, a message Deborah had sent to mutual friends, in which Deborah boasted that she'd got her parents to believe I was too busy to take care of their finances, and even bragged about how easy it had been to trick my mom into signing documents. As I read those words, my fury only intensified. Deborah hadn't just squandered her parents' money, she'd manipulated them into ostracizing me. Taking a deep breath, I forced myself to calm down. I realized that getting angry wouldn't help. I needed to come up with a plan to deal with this situation. I called my lawyer, Karen, a sharp and capable woman, who's been handling this for me ever since I discovered Deborah's credit card spending records. "Send me the complaint and those text messages," Karen said calmly, yet firmly. "We're going to file a counterclaim. Do you have any evidence to prove your contribution to this house?" "Of course I do. Several years ago, when my parents were facing a debt crisis, I paid off most of the mortgage, giving me a 30% ownership stake in the property. The relevant documents are all neatly filed away in a folder in my office, complete with signatures and notarized copies. I scanned these documents and sent them to Karen, my hands trembling. Not out of fear, but from an intense sense of clarity. Deborah thought she could rewrite history, but I've got all the proof. The next day, I went to Karen's office. She spread all the documents across her desk, my loan agreement, bank statements showing years of mortgage payment records, and even an email my mother had sent years ago, thanking me for helping them pay their bills. These documents prove that you've had a financial connection to this house since 2019, Karen said, pointing at the papers. Deborah's claim that you coerced your mother just doesn't hold up, but we need to prove that it was she who acted in bad faith. I nodded, recalling the credit card receipts Evelyn had sent me. The $800 charge at Target, the $1,200 charge at Nordstrom, and the travel expenses from Orlando. How's my audit request going? I asked. Karen leaned forward slightly. It's underway. We've already filed a motion with the court to appoint a forensic accountant to review your parents' accounts. If Deborah really did misuse their money, we'll definitely find out, I said. That evening, William and I were sitting at the kitchen table. The children had already fallen asleep upstairs. I told him about the lawsuit, those text messages, and the progress of the audit. He took my hand in his grip firm and steady. You did the right thing, he said. Deborah has gone too far. I squeezed his hand tightly, grateful for his support, yet my thoughts remained a jumble. I wasn't just angry at Deborah. I felt deeply disappointed in my parents, too, the ones who'd allowed all this to happen. They trusted her, handed over control of the account to her, and now they were watching helplessly as she took me to court. I thought back to my mother's voice message, her words, I miss the kids, and to my father, who'd been silent ever since our last call. They weren't just accomplices. They'd actively enabled her. A week later, Evelyn brought more news. I talked to our friend at the bank, she said. She privately checked some records for me. Your mom's credit card just had another $1,000 charge, spent at a jewelry store in Buckhead. It was recent, right after Deborah moved in. I clenched my phone tightly, my teeth grinding together. Deborah hadn't stopped at all. She was living in her parents' home, squandering their money, and now she was even trying to take something that rightfully belonged to me. I forwarded the new information to Karen, feeling more determined than ever. This wasn't just about the house anymore. I was going to expose Deborah for who she really was. I spent hours meticulously sifting through every single record I'd kept, double-checking every payment I'd made on behalf of my parents. I found a receipt for $5,000 in hospital fees from 2021, as well as a payment voucher for $2,000 in property taxes, all of which I'd advanced on their behalf. Each document serves as a stark reminder of how much I've given up, my career, my savings, my time. Meanwhile, Deborah hasn't given them anything but lies. I sent everything to Karen, along with a note that read, I hope the audit will cover every single transaction since Deborah moved in. I'm not letting her get away with this. My lawyer replied, We're building a strong case. Just stay focused. By the end of the month, I found myself strangely calm. The anger was still there, but it had become sharp and manageable, like a well-honed blade. I was no longer fighting for my parents' approval. Since the moment I walked out of that dinner, I'd stopped needing their validation. I was fighting for the truth, for my children, and for the life I've built for myself. Deborah underestimated me, and that was her biggest mistake. I'm ready to face her in court, lay out all the evidence, and let the whole world know who the real manipulator is. One morning, the accountant called to share the audit results, confirming what I'd suspected all along. Over the past 2 months, Deborah had withdrawn $14,000 from my mother's account, spending it on designer clothes from Nordstrom, electronics from Best Buy, a trip to Orlando, and smaller expenses like jewelry, dining, and spa treatments. A wave of relief washed over me. The evidence was finally conclusive, but at the same time, the realization hit me like a sharp stab. My mother had been completely unaware of all this, yet she'd trusted Deborah with our finances, letting her exploit her ruthlessly. I recalled how, for years, I'd painstakingly protected my mother and covered countless expenses on her behalf, only to find now that she'd been kept in the dark. Though my heart ached with sorrow, I forced myself to stay focused. I immediately forwarded the report to lawyer Karen, adding a note that this was crucial evidence. Less than an hour later, she called me back, saying the evidence was highly compelling and would be submitted to the court along with all other materials. I'd been preparing for this lawsuit for weeks already, and the credit card transaction records Evelyn had sent were just the beginning. I'd also obtained a surveillance video from the bank showing Deborah withdrawing cash from my mother's account at an ATM in Buckhead. Although the footage was somewhat blurry, it clearly showed her, same coat, same self-satisfied head posture. I'd also included the text messages Evelyn had sent, in which Deborah boasted about how she'd managed to win her parents' trust. Each piece of evidence was like a brick in the foundation of our case. I sent everything to Karen, my hand steady but my mind racing. This is no longer just about money. I'm determined to expose Deborah's true nature. The next day, I met with Karen to prepare for the trial. She laid out all the evidence on the conference table, audit reports, proof of expenses, surveillance footage, and text messages. Deborah's complaint claims that you coerced your mother, she said, but these pieces of evidence show that it was actually she who was taking advantage of them. We'll refute her accusations and seek compensation for damages. I nodded, my jaw clenched tight. Rather than feeling afraid at the thought of facing Deborah in court, I felt energized and ready. For far too long, I'd been the one left to clean up the mess and keep quiet, but now, I was finally prepared to fight back. Karen went over our strategy in detail. We'd submit the audit reports to refute Deborah's allegations, and then use this evidence to prove her economic abuse. This is a strong case, she said, but just be prepared for her to fight back. That evening, my phone vibrated. It was a text from Deborah. Sharon, can we talk? Things have gotten out of hand, and maybe we should just call it quits. I stared at the screen, seething with anger. She'd sued me, accusing me of theft, yet now she wanted to drop the whole thing. I could almost hear her voice, smooth, manipulative, just like the way she'd snatched my necklace right off my neck during that dinner party. I typed back, "You've made your choice. See you in court." I hit send, my heart racing, but my resolve was unshakable. Deborah thought she could talk her way out of this mess, but she'd seriously underestimated me. I wasn't going to back down, not one bit. That night, with the kids fast asleep upstairs, William sat beside me. "Are you okay?" he asked, his eyes filled with concern as he looked at me. I nodded, but the truth was far more complicated. With the audit report in hand, I felt a bit lighter, almost as if I'd finally caught Deborah red-handed. Yet the pain remained. It was my parents who had made all of this possible. They'd chosen her, trusted her, even after everything I'd done for them. I remembered my mother's voice message, her gentle words, "I miss the kids," and my father, who'd been silent ever since our last call. The way they'd turned a blind eye to what Deborah had done, it hurt me more than any argument ever could. I leaned against William, grateful for his steady presence. "I just wish this whole thing would be over already," I said. He squeezed my hand tightly. "You're almost there," he assured me. Over the next week, Karen and I worked closely together, refining the court documents, carefully double-checking every piece of evidence, and even rehearsing my testimony. I have to explain my contribution to this house. My payments have given me a 30% ownership stake, plus all the bills I've paid for them over the years. I'll have to face Deborah, my mother, and maybe even my father, and tell them the truth. Just imagining their expressions in court makes my heart ache, but I've been keeping my focus entirely on the evidence. The audit report is our cornerstone, and combined with the surveillance footage and text messages, Deborah's lies are falling apart piece by piece. I'm fully prepared to present all of her wrongdoing to the court. 2 days before the trial, Deborah called again. "Sharon, please," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean for things to turn out this way. Let's just resolve this as family members." I let out a cold, bitter laugh. "Deborah," I said, "you're the one who filed the lawsuit against me. Now you're not in any position to talk to me about being family." I hung up the phone. My hands were trembling, yet my thoughts were crystal clear. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. I was no longer fighting just for myself. I was fighting for the truth, for my children, and for the life I'd built despite their betrayal. The courtroom in Atlanta was quieter than I'd expected, the hum of the air conditioner and the rustle of papers filling the entire space. I sat beside my lawyer, Karen, my hands tightly clasped together on my lap. Deborah sat across the room, her posture stiff, her gaze darting nervously toward the judge. She wore a sharply tailored suit jacket, trying to project an image of composure and professionalism, but I could see how tightly she clenched her teeth, revealing her deep-seated tension. When the judge declared the hearing open, Deborah's lawyer was the first to stand, claiming that the mother had voluntarily given her the money and that the $14,000 she'd spent on clothes, electronics, and a trip to Orlando had all been with the mother's permission. "My client did this with her mother's consent," he said smoothly. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to shout, "Voluntary gift?" Her mother hadn't bought herself a new outfit in years. How could she possibly have agreed to let her spend so much money on these things? Karen stood up, radiating an aura of authority. She calmly presented our evidence. The forensic accountant's report, which detailed Deborah's withdrawal records, surveillance footage from the bank showing Deborah withdrawing cash at an ATM, and those text messages in which Deborah boasted about how she'd manipulated her parents. Then, she played for the court an audio message my mother had sent me years ago, in which she thanked me for covering her hospital bills and called me her lifeline. When the recording ended, the room fell utterly silent, but I could feel Deborah's furious gaze fixed squarely on me. Finally, Karen presented the receipts for all the payments I'd made toward this house, as well as the documentation proving that I held a 30% ownership interest. "My client didn't coerce anyone," she said. "She's been protecting her parents all along, while the defendant has been exploiting them." Less than an hour later, the judge delivered her verdict. "The evidence is conclusive," she declared firmly. "The defendant, Deborah Lynn, misused her mother's funds without her consent." The judge ordered Deborah to repay $17,000, including interest and court fees. A murmur rippled through the courtroom, but my gaze remained fixed on the judge, my heart tangled with a mix of triumphant joy and profound exhaustion. Deborah's face was deathly pale, her hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly they seemed about to crush it. I had won, but this victory felt like a boulder pressing down on my chest. I glanced briefly at Deborah's parents, who sat silently behind her, having remained utterly silent throughout the entire trial. My mother stared at her hands, her lips tightly pressed together. My father fixed his gaze straight ahead, his jaw clenched, deliberately avoiding my eyes. They didn't defend Deborah, but they didn't support me either. Their silence was more devastating than any argument we'd ever had. I remembered that dinner. The way my father raised his glass in a toast to Deborah, the way my mother handed her my necklace. Even now, with the truth finally out in the open, they still refused to look me in the eye. The distance between us felt like an abyss, one that seemed impossible to bridge forever. As we left the courtroom, Karen patted my arm and said, "You did it," she continued. "We've exposed her true nature." I nodded, forcing a weak smile, yet inside I felt utterly empty. I'd fought for the truth, and I'd won. The court had seen Deborah's true face, a manipulator who'd exploited her parents. But the price was my family. The way my parents looked at me, without even wanting to meet my gaze, confirmed what I'd been fearing all along. Even with the truth right in front of them, they'd still chosen her. Then I thought of William and the children waiting for me back home, and that's when I finally found my footing again. They're my real family, the one I've built with my own hands, the one that truly matters. The sun in Atlanta was blinding, shining down on the courthouse steps. Deborah lingered near the entrance. Her lawyer had already left. For a fleeting moment, I thought she might step forward, maybe even plead with me again, just as she'd done in that text, but instead, she simply turned around, her shoulders slumped, and disappeared into the crowd. There I stood, the weight of the verdict slowly pressing down on me. The $17,000 in compensation was more than I'd expected, but it couldn't erase all the years I devoted to my parents, nor could it make up for the neglect they'd shown me. I felt as though I'd won a battle, yet I'd lost something far more important. When I got home, William was waiting for me. "How did it go?" he asked softly. I showed him the court's verdict. The judge's signature stood out vividly on the paper. He hugged me, but I couldn't shake the emptiness inside. I'd proven my innocence and exposed Deborah's lies, but my parents' silence felt like a wound that would never fully heal. Sitting on the sofa, listening to the laughter of children upstairs, I couldn't help but wonder, would I ever hear from my parents again? This victory belonged to me, but it also left behind an emptiness I'd never anticipated, an emptiness carved out by the family I'd once known so well. For months after the trial ended, I made my final decision. With the court's ruling and the 30% ownership I already held, I regained full ownership of my parents' house. I sent a formal notice to my parents and Deborah, demanding that they move out within 45 days. This decision wasn't easy. Part of me still considered that house home, the place where I'd grown up, where my mother used to cook meals for us. But it was no longer home. It had become nothing more than a painful reminder of the betrayal I'd endured. I stood firm, determined to put an end once and for all to this wretched chapter of my life. Deborah didn't put up any resistance. I heard from our neighbors that she packed her bags and moved out within a week, leaving my parents behind without a second thought. She found a job at a nail salon in Decatur, barely making ends meet, and those dreams of taking control of the family were utterly shattered. I wasn't surprised at all. Deborah has always been like that. As soon as things get tough, she runs away, leaving others to clean up the mess. My parents have moved into a small apartment in the suburbs of Atlanta, using what little savings they had left to pay the rent. They never called me again, nor did they send a single text message. Their silence was their ultimate answer, a confirmation that they'd already made their choice long ago. A month later, I sold the house. The transaction went smoothly. A young couple bought it, eager to start their new life there. The sale brought in over $300,000, a sum that became my lifeline. I saved most of the money, setting up a scholarship fund for my children to secure their future college dreams, opportunities I'd never had myself. The rest of the money went toward paying off debts and starting a fresh chapter in my life. William and I found a new home, a modest house with a backyard, big enough for our kids to play in. It wasn't luxurious, but it was truly ours, the kind of home free from the shadows of the past. As I unpacked boxes in my new kitchen, I found myself reliving it all. The toast my father had given, my mother's necklace, Deborah's lies, and the eerie silence in the courtroom. I fought for justice and emerged victorious, but this victory has left its scars. My parents refused to face me squarely, refused to acknowledge the sacrifices I've made for them, and that cuts deeply. Yet standing here now, listening to the laughter of children and feeling William's steady presence by my side, a new emotion wells up within me, freedom. For years, I've carried their burdens on my shoulders. Now, at last, I can let them go. I've built my own life, started my own family, and found my own sense of worth. It was through pain and difficult choices that I gradually came to realize this truth. Self-respect is something you earn for yourself. No one can simply hand it to you. For years, I tried to seek validation from my parents, sought solace in a necklace. But in the end, I discovered that true self-respect lies in the courage to fight for myself, in the unwavering determination to stand up against Deborah, and in the process of reclaiming everything that rightfully belongs to me. The house is gone now, and that family has long since fallen apart, but I've become whole. My children will come to understand as they grow up that their worth doesn't depend on anyone else's approval. That's all they need.